Welcome to our third in our three-part series of our winter Be Inspired, Be Informed series. And this one, obviously, we're going to talk about real estate. And so people are, well, what does the Jewish National Fund have to do with real estate? And so the answer to the question is, and I'm going to show you very briefly about how we go about doing what we do, is that we, Jewish National Fund, accepts gifts of real estate. And there are reasons for it. It's been a very large component of our fundraising. It allows our donors to, we can show them flexibility on certain gifts, and it is an important part of what we do. So I'm going to just go briefly through how we do what we do and maybe put some bugs in your ears. And then if you need some more information, you'll just call either myself or one of the other plan giving professionals. So we always get asked the question, can I donate? As I just said, yes. We actually are promoting gifts of real estate. What do you get? What are the benefits? Why would someone want to do this? Well, we have found several reasons. You get an income tax deduction for the full fair market value of the property. Usually, most of the time, these are long-term held properties where the tax basis might be down to zero. And so you avoid the capital gains tax. And in some states, like California and New York, those capital gains taxes, along with the federal capital gains tax, can be onerous. It helps with estate planning, in that the value of the property is removed from the estate. And if you're interested, we could show you some really flexible methods on how to achieve some goals for yourself, your heirs, and also the Jewish National Fund. So one of the ways we do this, we have many of our donors who say, gee, I'd like to give you a piece of property, but I don't want to give up the income. Can that be done? The answer is absolutely yes, and we do this all the time. You can donate the real estate through a charitable remainder trust. We can provide you with the trust document, certain trust services. We don't charge the fee. And the end result is we try to match up the income you're receiving with the charitable remainder trust. You get a deduction. You won't pay capital gains taxes. And then when the trust terminates, whatever is left comes to Jewish National Fund for its work. So if you have a piece of property and you say, gee, I really would like to get rid of it. I don't want to give up the income. How can I do it? Give us a call. We'll show you some great ideas. Many people say, I don't want to give up the property. I want to make a gift and I want my heirs to receive it. Can we do that? The answer is absolutely yes. We have a vehicle called the Charitable Lead Trust, where the donor donates the property to the trust. It tells the trust to pay the Jewish National Fund for a term of years or life. And then at the end of the trust term, the real estate is gifted back to the heirs, usually children or grandchildren. So again, if you have a piece of property, you'd like to get some tax benefits, you'd like to help Jewish National Fund, but you don't want to give up the asset to your heir for your heirs, we can show you a method by how to do that. Other people say, I've got this house, I've got no one to leave it to. I'd like to leave it to Jewish National Fund. I don't want to move, however. Can I do that and get current benefits? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. We do it through a retained life estate. It's a very simple gift. You make the gift to the house, you get to stay in the house, you enjoy the house, you pay all the taxes, you pay all of the expenses to keep it going. And at the time of the trust term ends, the house comes to the Jewish National Fund. And what we'll do is we will sell it at that time. It could be for a term of years. It could be over life. If you want to sell it during the term, you could do that. If you want to rent it during the term, you can do that. And we can show you all of the ins and outs on how to take advantage of some of these really unique and very beneficial programs. What type of real estate? We'll take almost anything. We won't take a timeshare, but we will take homes, buildings, industrial, apartment, raw land, if it could be sold and and it can pass due diligence, we'll be able to take it and show you some very creative things. Many of our donors have held for a long time, and for whatever reason, they just don't want to hold the property. We had a gentleman in Long Island just had a piece of property, didn't want to deal with it anymore, made the contribution, got $1.5 million tax deduction. It was a piece of raw land. We sold the property right at the cost of the appraisal, right at the price at the appraisal. He was happy, and we were able to fund not only the Jewish National Fund, but it made a nice contribution to his synagogue. So that's our story. If you need additional information, you can give us a call, 1-800-562-7526. Go on our website, jnflegacy.org, or email us at plangiving@jnf.org, and any of our plan giving professionals will be able to walk you through the details. So if you got something, give us a call. I think we could show you some great ideas. Bill, take it away.
Matt, thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Brian Paul and Mike Pacini with Premier Design and Build Group. Brian is co-founder and managing principal, and he day-to-day ensures that his clients have the information they need and the tools at hand to make decisions throughout the real estate and construction process. While Mike is responsible for the president to include the day-to-day oversight of the company, human resources, marketing, and national operations as a whole. They've got a combined 40 years in the experience in real estate and construction. And I'm going to turn it over to Mike and Brian.
Great. Thanks, Bill. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for attending today. I'm Brian Paul. I'm one of the founders of Premier Design and Build Group. This is one of my partners, Mike Pacini. 10-second overview of what we are. We are a design build general contractor. We're based in Chicagoland. We have an office in Irvine, California, and an office in New Jersey. And we thought when we were asked by the fund to come speak today, we thought we could at least bring what we see in our lenses of what we're seeing across the country and some of the trends out there, and be able to give our opinions. We know there's a lot of people on this phone call or on the Zoom conference here that have a lot of other experiences outside of what we do, and can definitely bring some ideas to this conversation as well. Please, we encourage people to use the chat menu on this, so we can see if there's conflicting ideas or if there's other ideas we're not thinking about. But we're a design build general contractor, started in 2004. We are primarily we cut our teeth in industrial, but we do a lot of other types of work as well. We do medical office, we do office, we do, we're industrial, obviously. We do a lot of adaptive reuse, and we do residential as well, so multifamily residential. Started in 2004, 3 offices. We are working in 15 or 16 states right now. And we're roughly we're not huge, we're about 400 to 500 million a year in construction. And our specialty is helping to make really difficult projects move forward. So, and I think that where we're at today, that will, it's definitely a benefit, and hopefully some of our ideas today can spark a few things on the audience's side today. So, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Mike Pacini, as Brian said, president of Premier. I think when Billy and Matt asked us to participate in the Zoom, we thought, how are we relevant as a contractor? I don't think everyone wants to hear about commodity pricing and labor trends, but I think we have a unique perspective that we could bring to the conversation just based on the clients we deal with, who are developers on a national level, REITs throughout the country. I think our vantage point from someone who's involved in viewing assets very early on, not from what they are, but what they can become, gives us a unique position in the marketplace to kind of see things that are new trends that are developing, especially in the last 12 months when everything in the world has started to change. I think there's a huge need to reevaluate what everyone has and what it can become. And that's where we participate on the development side. We're big in building, that's what we do, that's our core business, but we're also part of the process of evaluating existing assets and determining how they can be repositioned and revitalized in the current economy.
So we should have started out. We hope everyone on this call is doing well, safe, healthy as well. And that leading into the point that the world's a different place, and it will be once we're in a post-COVID environment, from where we were going into this and where we're going to be after this. And there's some trends that we see right now out there that are perhaps just for a during COVID time period. And there's some things that the world is not going to change back to how it was. So this slide up here, we have, let's just jump into it. We have a couple slides here where we'll be able to turn this off later on, especially when we get to some question and answers. But in terms of what we're seeing out there nowadays, and especially during this COVID time period, last mile, you want to jump in here as well, please?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think to Brian's point, I think what we're seeing is an acceleration of trends that have been building for the last several years, but now with somewhat of a forecasted new normalcy in the future. And how does that impact these trends and future asset classes? So, for instance, and I'll go through some of the markets we're seeing that have very distinctive changes and that we're seeing trends in. One that I think everyone is aware of is the brick and mortar retailers and their acceleration into e-commerce. This is at an unprecedented pace. Obviously, the retail locations they're suffering right now with people not being able to come through the threshold. However, everyone has realized that this last mile distribution and getting products directly to a door in a matter of hours has created a whole new dynamic in the economy. So we're seeing a tremendous demand for last mile facilities in urban centers and suburban centers throughout the country that's somewhat taking place of the traditional retail storefront that used to exist throughout the country. And it's just a tremendous acceleration in that market itself.
It's definitely accelerated from COVID. I'm sure everyone on this call has been has used Amazon and every other service out there during COVID to get products to your house, and you want it quickly. We're all accustomed to running to the store, whether it was Target, whether it was 20 years ago to the department store. You want to get in and out, you want your products. Amazon has obviously done an extremely good job and at least getting stuff overnight, and sometimes they can do day of type deliveries as well. But the last mile is one of those things that we see is it's anyone's guess what it looks like after COVID, and we absolutely do not forecast it's going away. But does every single person that uses Amazon for their overnight stuff, for everything they're buying now, how much are they accustomed to that? Is it going to be a permanent thing in all of our day-to-day lives, or will we start getting back to the stores and actually buying? But the last minute, we do not believe the last mile is not going away. It's just how much will remain from our COVID lives to our post-COVID lives is a guess, but from where we sit, and we're an industrial contractor, we have a lot of visibility into this space. We would absolutely bet that it's not going away. If it down ticks, it'll be a little bit, but we absolutely see in this being part of our normal life post-COVID.
Yeah, and that's not to say that some of the assets associated with this don't still hold tremendous value. Strip centers, for one, which are very commonplace throughout the country. This is kind of how we lived and how we conducted commerce for the last century. Strip centers that were anchored with grocers, those guys are doing very well. Like everyone, everyone's realized that ordering online to get your food to your door isn't as practical as it sounds,
or as easy.
Yeah, or as easy.
Yeah.
So those facilities have done well. However, all the other, outside of that major anchor tenant, the other guys are struggling. So we're seeing new trends in the strip center space that's kind of changed over the years. A lot of medical offices moving into that space. So you're seeing co-anchored facilities where you have a grocer on one end, you have a medical provider on the other end, and everything's kind of getting closer to the community for more convenient, I'd almost call it last mile services. Outside of last mile distribution, you're seeing a big demand for people who want convenience closer to home. So the strip centers aren't going away. They're being somewhat repurposed. You're seeing, again, grocers, medical office, and then some of the infill in between there is distribution. I mean, these are facilities that have larger warehouse further out who are using center space to stock inventory and car it out to the local markets. So it's a unique one.
If there's strip centers out there, and everybody knows their own neighborhoods, if the strip centers that don't have an anchor in there right now are going completely vacant, At least in the Chicagoland area, that's where we have the most visibility. This is not our space on day to day in terms of building new strip centers and renovating strip centers to continue to. We have repurposed them. We'll get to that in a little bit here, but we are absolutely seeing the strip center world is a struggling world. The ones that have the right anchors and are being repurposed are doing well, but that is not a space that we're betting on. It's not a space that we're chasing right now. Very much so.
Yeah, that's absolutely, it's not falling off of anyone's radar, but I think it's being looked at under a new lens now. So
if there's ideas out there on how to repurpose them, bring them to the table and start jumping out and doing it, because the traditional strip center, what we knew from our childhoods, I think that's in the past.
Yeah, and we're also seeing that some of these, strip centers traditionally have enormous parking facilities. Those are starting to mix up with multifamily opportunities where people want to be near the grocery store, they want to be near medical providers. And now they're looking at that, that large land parcel for multiple uses. So it's not that they're going away, it's just that they're going to have to adapt to the way people have changed their lifestyles, especially in the last year. But this was, a trend that had begun maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and that has accelerated tremendously, in part to COVID. Part of it's the COVID impact. So
and these are just 4 examples of 4 different product types. These are not the 4 end all and be all types here, but they are things that need to be talked about where there is a change in the marketplace to these uses. On the office front, suburban office in the Midwest market it's been struggling for many years now. Downtown urban offices throughout the country have been struggling, and that's entirely not entirely, but the urban office is definitely affected by COVID, especially in the big cities. They're not opened up yet. They're dying right now. If you're a contractor and you were in that space, you needed to reinvent yourself pretty quickly. There's nothing going on in Chicago, New York. LA is a little different. They don't have as big of a CBD as these other ones. I'm not quite sure what the office market looks out there in terms of the high-rise stuff. In LA, the office space is still very, very expensive. We're currently looking for an office. We're in Orange County there. It's hot. It's hard to find a place still. It's easier than it was a few years ago, but the office market, from at least our own perspective, is doing okay out that way. Suburban office in Chicago is very, very weak. COVID's made it even worse. What remains is be seen what it's going to look like, but we've actually seen some of the offices starting to convert into other types of products. Whether it's tearing it down entirely or just reusing the office for a completely different purpose. We were talking about that earlier today, if you want to jump in on a few of those points.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of ties into, one of the the leading trend we see everywhere, and this is, I don't think is going away, is probably the adaptive reuse.
That's in all product types of what we're seeing.
And it ties into all of these. I think in the office space, in multifamily space, across the country, is that looking at some of these assets and markets that aren't as viable as they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago, that can be repurposed or applied to an adaptive reuse program where you're converting office to senior living. That is a huge market. That is happening everywhere. We are seeing a lot of people who are looking at what were formerly thought of as distressed assets or struggling assets through the perspective of senior living and multifamily housing, and now suddenly they're viable again. These are the things that perspective is everything. If you're looking at them for the traditional asset class and traditional returns, they don't make sense. When you're looking at them through a creative development, suddenly these things have real intrinsic value. And
something we didn't even talk about earlier in our pre-con here was the addition of all these multifamily type properties and this reinvention of these types of properties is also the storage locker business is booming right now. We have a lot of developers who are chasing this. We know a lot of people trying to get into that space. So it's one of those, I don't want to say unintended consequence, but one of those collateral type needs that's out there is when you have multifamily, you traditionally don't have as much storage. And we're seeing the storage facility business is booming right now as well. In where I live right now, and in a couple of areas in the Chicagoland area at least, they're full. You can't even find one where you want it right now. So I think it's going to be a saturated market that will settle down at one point, but right now we're seeing that as a hot market as well. So
yeah, I think another under the same headline of adaptive reuse, the mega malls, the Mall of America types with indoor congregation. they're, I don't want to say they're obsolete, but they're just not as desirable as they once were. And what we're seeing is a lot of people looking at those spaces, that land use, and one for distribution centers. I mean, they're usually in great locations. The whole development plan behind those was to get them to be centralized to support multiple communities. They no longer work for the brick and mortar or the small retailers in mass size, but as a distribution center to bring product from multiple retailers to local communities, it works. So those again, I mean, they've struggled. People are seeing them, they're filing bankruptcy left and right. The operators are kind of going by the wayside, but now people are looking at them as repurposing them for a different use. And
It's still evolving in terms of what malls are going to be. There's some malls that are absolutely hopping right now. Most malls right now, indoor type malls that are the 60s, 70s, early 80s models, those ones seem to be struggling. And what they're going to look like on the back end, it's still evolving. There's a lot of parking lot leasing that's happening. We'll talk about parking lots later here today as well. But we see a lot of Amazon vans, a lot of overnight parking type in mall parking lots. We're seeing a lot of malls try to reinvent themselves now with lifestyle centers there, where there's multifamily being attached to the mall in the parking lot to try to drive more population to these malls. But it's a moving target where we're trying to figure out what to do with these types of products in general. But malls, the anchor stores are going out of business. Some stores inside are doing well, but as the anchors are leaving and less traffic is going into there, the future of the malls is there'll be less of them. There'll probably be a few very successful ones. There's probably going to be some attrition, and a lot of these are going to be either turned into something completely different on the land or just repurposed as a facility on its own.
Yeah, and I think along with that trend, the concept of a mall and the concept of a place to go with family and friends, and again, to buy, to consume, it's not going away. It's just doing it in a different environment. We're actually seeing a lot of older assets in the industrial space, older warehousing and distribution. Some of these parks that were built in the 60s and 70s that were smaller spaces, smaller facilities that are not conducive to storing mass quantities of goods, being converted into promenade type malls. So they're actually taking these great old facilities, anchoring them with restaurants and entertainment centers and different types of businesses. It's all open air, and it's somewhat like a park. It's almost a lifestyle center.
Those were right place, right time when they were built in the 50s, 60s. These are older buildings, and it's great real estate for 1950s, 60s for small industrial buildings. And nowadays, we have a specific project we did in the suburbs of Milwaukee. It was in the 50s and 60s. It was a great industrial park, surrounded by very expensive houses now, and it just was the wrong product, right location for something, and they ended up turning that into a retail center, the Nordstrom Rack type environment, where we literally in an industrial park. They chopped off the fronts, they built the giant promenades out there, and it's a very, very successful project. Took a $100 million deal, up 4 or 5 years worth of construction ongoing. But again, if you have assets and they were good many years ago, considering converting it to the best use for the location is something that should be thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of all ties back to perspective. These things are evolving. They're evolving quickly, faster than they ever have in the past, because everyone's lifestyles have changed, their needs have changed. So again, this is the stuff we're seeing at the forefront of the trends. Some of the existing stuff that was in place, again, multifamily, doing great. That's been a bright spot for many years now. Don't see any changes in the trends there. That's not going away. Medical office, that space has definitely changed.
That's been going on for a while, that change, and with COVID and post-COVID, we think it's accelerated. But
yeah, I think that space in particular is breaking away from the large medical campus. The hospitals are overcrowded. They have no more space, and people, quite frankly, just don't want to have to drive into these enormous buildings to see their doctor anymore. So we're seeing a huge demand from medical providers to look for smaller spaces, again, in strip centers and all these new types of consumer access areas. And that's primarily where they're looking to build a footprint.
We want to be by the people, where the hospital campuses of 30 years ago, these hospital companies, there's been a lot of consolidation in the marketplace over the years. They're now developing their medical office buildings around the communities. So in Chicagoland, you have Northwest, they're all doing it now. It seems to be everybody wants to go to the doc in the box. Nobody's going to the hospital other than for the procedures. And the hospitals are pushing the doctors out as well for their day-to-day practices. They don't have the room. It's too expensive to do it there. So that's a product type that was, for the last 20 years, we've been seeing this. A lot of developers have tried to get into that space, and it's doing very, very well. On the back end of COVID, and with the population in the United States, the baby boomers getting older and older as well, there's absolutely going to be a need to continue that trend. So that's one we love, and we'll continue to focus on that space.
I would say probably the space we have the largest vantage point from would be on land demand, just throughout the entire country. The distribution requirements for some of the bigger players in the space and all the up and comers, the Amazons in particular, the scale and the footprint of the facilities they need to conduct these businesses is unprecedented. So the land required to construct these facilities has grown exponentially. That said, land that many years ago just wouldn't pencil out. It was not viable economically, because either they were old manufacturing facilities, old plants, old municipal waste dumps, old lakes. I mean, you name it, this stuff was never looked at as an asset that could be developed. Well, now the demand has become so strong that suddenly the environmental challenges are no longer the obstacle. The challenges with the earth itself are no longer obstacles. Everyone's gotten smarter and figured out how can we use this space that's much needed throughout the economy to keep it moving and position it to develop product.
They're not growing more land. So you have to figure out a way to make do with the land that's out there. We've had many sites that we have tackled and are continuing to tackle that 30, 40 years ago, people had the mentality, they're never going to build here. And they've used the land in such ways that are your unregulated landfills. There's lakes. We have built warehouses on top of what once was an existing lake in the Florida market. Florida is not growing wetlands. You're stuck between the Everglades and the ocean in the Miami side, for instance. And where people have detention ponds, they're literally taking garbage, filling in detention ponds, and we're finding ways to get this done where there's roadway debris. It gets thrown in a detention pond, fills it up to grade, it's engineered, and we are building buildings on top of what once was a lake. They're not growing land anymore in these very dense urban markets where it's constrained either by actual land or by government regulation, which is in a lot of places as well, especially in California, where you can't build in so many places. Finding ways to take land that is contaminated, landfill, just the soils are so poor you can't build on them. We're finding ways now to take these properties and to turn them into viable properties. They're not in bad locations necessarily for today, but there's so much. These infill sites are where all the focus is now, because the prime easy sites are all gone essentially.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the lake analogy is a great one, because we've seen this a lot. We started doing this 6-7 years ago in the Southeast markets, where someone who had developed, was a big part of the land expansion in Florida. By the time they built and developed everything, all that was left was, maybe a 40-acre lake, and they essentially thought it was worth nothing. Well, again, it turns out there was a savvy developer on the back end who looked at it a little bit differently, and it was worth just as much as the prime land in the city.
There was a point, and probably today, they're selling lakes for the same price you can buy raw land in some of these areas. So it's with the intention that it becomes land.
Right. And again, the environmentally challenged sites, the former landfills that have been capped and unusable, by our communities for decades, suddenly now those environmental issues can be solved, and repurposing the earth and figuring out how to make this part of the community and fulfill the commerce needs of the country is back on the table. And it makes economic sense as prices have continued to skyrocket and rents are going up. It's opened up a tremendous amount of new opportunities, again, for asset classes that no one realized had any value left to them. So, these are several areas we're seeing, as I guess we would consider a trend that maybe started in 2020, but we see tremendous acceleration going into 21 and beyond.
In the last few years with e-commerce taking off, and especially during the last year here, we've seen an explosion on parking requirements as well. The amount of trucks that are being used now compared to what it was 10 years ago, astronomically higher now. So semi-parking is a huge hot demand around the country. We're seeing towns don't want them. Towns don't want trucks. They don't want to park there. They don't want semis. There are industrial parks, but the amount of trucks that are going through to find land to allow parks to truck parks on it is getting more rare and more rare. So they're at a premium right now. And the other thing with Amazon specifically, and eventually hope there maybe be Amazon competitors, but that panel van or that little sprinter truck from Amazon, finding parking for those is a huge hot item as well. There's companies that are popping up right now, which are brokering places to go park for Home Depot, to go park for Amazon, to go find them parking in these metro areas. So it's a huge and very tight market because the amount of land that you need for it. Land is very expensive nowadays, and to make it work out financially, and also that towns don't want parking, and it doesn't create revenue for them. No sales tax on it. It's just not a desirable product type. But if you have land, or there's somewhere where you can have, if you have extra parking lots and you can put parking on there, it's in huge demand right now.
I think one more bright spot that we see that's, again, continuing urban infill locations. So the Amazon story, the Amazon needs these massive warehouse distribution facilities, even last mile, doesn't necessarily service you once you get into Manhattan or get into the CBD in Chicago. So what we're seeing is, again, developers looking at creative ways to get a footprint, maybe a smaller footprint in more mass in these urban centers. So former, smaller apartment buildings that may have lined the streets that, are kind of capped on rents may no longer be the desirable asset, but that land has a tremendous value in bringing, last mile, last minute distribution to the community. So we're, especially around airports, Newark, around O'Hare, downtown Chicago, New York, all these markets, there's a tremendous need to be able to get this product into the city and have shorter distribution times on bikes from these facilities to the local consumers. And that comes with it, along with that comes need for cold storage, because the restaurant markets have changed dramatically as well. And I think everyone believes when it's safe and we can get back to eating at restaurants with friends and family, can't wait to do it. However, people have grown accustomed to being able to order and get a hot meal delivered to their door in a couple minutes. So we're seeing a trend where they're known as ghost kitchens. People are setting up shops where there may be 10, food service providers all sharing one kitchen in a community, and controlling distribution from this centralized area to all the consumers. So that demand is growing, and some of the older asset classes that filled in those spaces, the local service garage, maybe some of these older mom and pop stores that are no longer viable, those are going away, and they're being filled in with a good service provider where there's tremendous need right now.
The most obvious one, and anybody who watches or pays attention to real estate trends, industrial as a whole, and not just last mile, is by far, from our perspective, is the hottest market out there right now. Industrial parks in general that are near the main interstates across the country. There's more trucking now. There's more freight moving right now than ever before, and it's not going anywhere. With the last mile products we talked about earlier, with the amount of e-commerce happening right now, with COVID, all the shortages we had. We talk about this often. What does it look like 2 years from now? Not when everyone's running around and they say it's safe to go out again, but 2 years from now, when everything is settled down, do manufacturers and distributors start bringing products here and warehousing it now, so that if there is another pandemic type shutdown, that we don't have shortages from whatever. We could have invented this story years ago in terms of the collateral effects that happened. Everybody thought real estate was going to die everywhere. It exploded through the roof when it came to industrial, but there was no product. We couldn't buy toilet paper. This is, everybody on this call knows all about this, and all these products we need out of China. If you want to go buy a microwave right now, and especially it's particular microwave refrigerator, there's lead times on everything right now. Demand is there. They haven't caught up on everything. COVID's affected it. The economic pressures affected it with the just different policies. But we talk about after this is all said and done, manufacturing, we believe will, it's not gonna, you can't compete in America as you can in some of these other countries on the other side of the earth, but there will be more manufacturing here. People aren't going to be willing to risk to save a dime on a widget to not have widgets to sell if something happens one day. So it's not everybody, but we believe there will be a trend in that direction where manufacturing will come back, companies will be willing to pay a little more, and they will do less just-in-time inventory from overseas. And I think we'll be warehousing more in this country just to avoid shortages, because while the demand was there, the product wasn't to sell, so there was lost opportunities there. So the pendulum, will it swing completely to a different direction? Doubtful, but it will start coming back where people will second guess moving everything overseas. So our next slide here, what's hot, what's not. I think we touched on that before. We'd love some questions and hear some people's feedback. I'm sure there's people in here who have completely different opinions than we do. This is strictly from our lens. So what we're seeing, we are in an industrial space primarily, which does funnel down to many other spaces as well. And what we're saying, I think there's a lot of consensus on a lot of this, but we'd love some questions and to hear what other people have here. So,
Michael, I just wanted to say you mentioned the dish. We were looking for a dishwasher, and in every store we went to, Lowe's, Home Depot, you picked it out, they would tell us you got to wait about 5 months to get it.
Yeah. I mean,
There's
that's,
no inventory, and they can't get them.
yeah, it's a
That should
dangerous,
change, but we just lived through that.
it's crazy. It's not just appliances. To build a warehouse right now, the cost, we weren't going to go down this path, but just to give an example of shortages, what used to be a product, the structural steel, which used to, forget about the cost has tripled from 4 or 5 months ago. So, and it's millions of dollars of distribution. The cost of just a steel to get it is 8-9 months now. It's unprecedented in I've been doing this 23, 24 years. I've never seen anything like this. There's a shortage just in terms of the materials to build warehousing, because warehousing has exploded so much.
yeah, and the premiums associated with these shortages are not sustainable. So there will definitely be a need for this stuff to kind of reestablish itself, here in the U.S. The offshore made economic sense, but what we realized when we were no longer able to get it into our ports, the cost to continue is too great. So I think we'll see, we're starting to see steel plants, the furnaces are coming back on, they're starting to ramp up production. I think we're going to see that continue. And I think outside of just, commodity sectors, across all asset sectors.
It'll find an equilibrium. We're erring on the side that it's going to come back here more, and warehousing will continue, I think, is the high level summary of it all.
Absolutely.
Right now, it is so far off in terms of the cost to build, the cost of land, rents are high. There has to be an equilibrium. It's going to have to cool down a little bit. It's so hot right now, but it's definitely an industrial world for a while here with the what we see as the new norm.
Thank you both. And I know we've got a lot of questions, so we're going to start. There's actually questions for both Matt about what he talked about, and also Brian and Mike. So I'll kind of go back and forth. Mike and Brian, you talked about turning in the office space into senior living, or kind of like the rental senior living type place. What do you see in terms of people maybe building building apartment buildings as opposed for rentals as they're getting later in life?
Well, I mean, I think it's again an important part of the real estate community to have these asset classes. I think there's a tremendous demand for them. People entering the workforce are more interested in probably rental communities. So it's not just the aging demographic, it's also a very young demographic who's more interested in being in the right location, having the right amenities, and having a very lowered cost of living than coming out of school with debt and going right into a home. So
when I got into the workforce, I couldn't wait to own a house. That was on my mind. Now we talk to the people who work for us now, and you talk about them owning a house one day or a condo or whatever it may be. The desire is just not as ingrained in them as having to own something as it was when we were growing up. So the rental market, we believe, is I just read in Cranes, I think earlier this week, about some more deconversions from condos back to apartments. So I think rentals of apartments here are going to continue. I think that the ones that are near commuter type facilities, whether it's the metro, the bus, what part of the country you're in, the train, those are going to continue to do well, we believe. There's a lot of money in the country right now. They need to be nicer products. I don't think that the dingy, crappy apartments of old are going to make it anymore. I think they need to be upgraded. But we see apartment rental and multifamily in the areas where there's commuter transportation is very, very hot right now and going to continue to do well.
I think on the senior living space.
Yeah, we skipped your question there.
Yeah, on senior living, it seems like, office and hotel, the infrastructure is already there to convert to senior living. It's hard to go from, a condo to a senior living because you need mass infrastructure. You need, a centralized kitchen that can service a lot of people. It just has a different structural requirement to it. That hotel asset class, it struggled. I mean, people aren't taking up the room. Key counts are down tremendously. People just don't live like that right now. And some of the operators are going out of business. But again, as a senior living class, it's absolutely a great asset to have. I mean, that everything's already there. So it's a very simple conversion that has a tremendous amount of intrinsic value.
Hotels of senior livings, we would expect to take off as the population ages and is looking for those facilities. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And construction costs are so high nowadays, and they have been, and now even more so, that the cost to convert something is a lot cheaper than it is to go into a ground up.
Thank you. Next question is actually for Matt, but it's based off of something that Mike said. Mike, you talked about, filling in, and Brian, you're filling in landfills and lakes and land of that use. Matt, can you donate land like that? If this individual has land that may not be, how do they know if it's able to be donated? You're muted. You're muted.
There we go. If it's not environmentally contaminated, if it's a piece of property where we can get in touch with real estate professionals in the area and get an opinion that yes, if this is done, then that's done. As what the guys were talking about, and they'll say this could be repurposed. That means it can be sold, and that's what we're interested. We're just interested. We're not developers. And we're not landholders. We're interested in helping the donor get rid of a property in a tax efficient way. And our job would be to sell it as quickly as we could for the appraised value that the donor is getting. So the answer is yes, depending upon the circumstances. And that's like anything else.
Matt, can I ask you a question here? Just building on that. Do you have to actually take possession, or can you just be a party in a transaction?
No, that's a great question. That's part of, I didn't want to get into the weeds of how this is done.
Well, I'm asking that.
If you're going to make a gift to us, Jewish National Fund, and you want to get all the tax benefits, it has to be a gift. The Jewish National Fund either directly as an outright gift or as the trustee of a charitable remainder trust must take possession of the property, full title transfer prior to any sale or what we call incidents of sale. And what we'll do is we'll work with the donor for the timing. There's a timing thing that has to be done. And we've done so many of these over the years. We could walk you through that process.
Well, I asked that because on the environmental side, if somebody does have a desire to work with you guys, the industrial developers nationally, the sophisticated ones are absolutely interested in. They will build on environmentally sensitive, which today is environmentally an issue. And if there's a way in terms of getting the charity involved in that. There's absolutely a use for it, and there's absolutely an end user, but if there's some sort of a tax consequence that you guys can all work together, and could be completely out of turn here on this. I know that if somebody has environmentally sensitive land, there's absolutely, if it's in the right location, of course, and the right dimensions.
If we'll do our due diligence.
Yeah.
If it turns out that it's a risk we can't take, or the property itself is contaminated and we don't want to deal with that with the new buyer, sometimes you have to say we can't take it.
Sure.
I got to tell you, in the 30 years and the hundreds of deals that we've done, I can't think of but 2 that we had to turn down. So we do our homework, and assuming, you know, the risks aren't too big, we will accept the property as a gift.
Excellent. Couple more questions. You're talking about warehousing and all the industrial type warehouses. Are you adding office space to those warehouses, or is it strictly warehouses today? What do you see versus maybe what you saw a year or 2 years ago?
Absolutely both. I think yes, there's a tremendous demand for office component within these distribution facilities, and the workforce associated with, an Amazon, for instance, is enormous. So the office footprint has grown, I'd say probably over the last 5 or 6 years. It's doubled is a tremendous understatement. I mean,
We've had 1 million square foot buildings with 10 employees before, where it's a 1,000 square foot office, a couple forklift guys. It's the amount of people that used to work in these warehouses, there's 1 person in an office or 2, has completely changed. There's a lot of office that is happening in these warehouses and spaces, and we find a lot more corporate offices where they want their product in their building, the giant corporate headquarter model, and then off campus distribution from them. We see that waning, and a lot of times there's consolidation. It's very expensive to run a corporate headquarters in one place, or warehousing in another, and they're just finding it more efficient to put them together. So we're seeing a lot of that.
One concept that we've seen floated around over the last couple of years, and I think we've seen 2 this year, is a concept where the warehouse distribution facility actually has a multifamily component built into it or above it. I mean, this is, again, so
Seeing the concept.
Yeah, it hasn't come out of the ground yet, but this is where people's heads are at.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, everyone wants to be, from, I think, I forgot what the expression is, but from the bedroom to the boardroom, everyone wants to be very close at hand to their business, and the labor force to have easy access. And that's kind of where things are going. So.
Very nice, thank you. Someone asked about ghost kitchens. Can you expand upon them? Are they typically warehoused in warehouse type or lower rent facilities? And do you see their popularity continuing when we're all able to go eat in a restaurant?
All right, so yeah, a couple different components to that. Yes, definitely a trend that's going to continue. It makes sense for concepts to be able to test things out without having to go, full on bricks and mortar new facility. Like, you got a new idea for some type of a restaurant concept. You take a small piece of a co-working space within a mass kitchen. You bring it to market. You get your feedback, and if it makes sense, yes, then you could start expanding your footprint anywhere in the country. But also, that's a viable business, right? I mean, you could do this in a shared space at a very low cost and still sell the same tickets. So that's definitely not going away. It's just a smart model. And I think in some areas where rents are so high, in some of this, again, Chicago's, New York's, LA's, where rents for a restaurant are astronomical, this model makes sense. People are still paying the same amount per plate, but you're not paying the same overhead. So
I don't think that with the smartphones developing and the Uber Eats and all these delivery services, they're making a lot of these meals out of these kitchens as well. McDonald's can very well, your delivery from McDonald's very well might not come from McDonald's. It might come from their products being made by the team at a ghost kitchen. So.
Yeah, and I think there's probably some, again, not to get into the restaurant business, but I imagine when you're buying with a group of 10 other restaurateurs and you're all buying produce together, there's some economic benefits to that model as well. So it doesn't take a tremendous amount of space to get 10 guys producing food. This could be a tailor shop in the city, on a 50 by 75 foot lot, suddenly can be a viable, enterprise for 10, 15 restaurants to share kitchen space. So yeah, definitely something we don't think is going away. I think it's probably growing and probably going to spread outside of the cities into the suburbs as there's, more multifamily development and expansion.
Pretty
Bill,
cool
you mind if I
concept.
ask Bill,
Yeah, go ahead.
ask him a question. So I'm listening to all of this, and it sounds like there's a lot of opportunities. You can't make recommendations, but where would an investor who doesn't have the wherewithal to develop their own, are there REIT sponsors that deal in these various subsects that you know of? That's all.
I don't think it's gonna be a REIT. A REIT answers to, it's a public company. It's a publicly traded company, a REIT by definition, but
Right.
are developers looking for partners? Absolutely. There's developers out there. Every developer, if there's a piece of land, they might knock on your door one day and say, hey, you want to do a warehouse here? And you could be the landholder and you might be partners with them. They'll be the developer and you'll be a partner in the deal. So it's contacting developers in that space to see if there's an interest, but development is obviously hot right now. It's a very hot economy out there. So if you have a product type and for do it or homework, we're obviously here to answer questions on our opinions on anything. For somebody who wants to reach out to us directly, we'll certainly, if it's not for us or not our expertise, we know a lot of people, we can help to push people to the right people. But absolutely, we see where there's partnerships between existing landholders and or property owners and a developer of some sort who's looking to do something with the facility.
Yeah, there are plenty of soybean farmers in the Midwest who are now probably on the cutting edge of real estate development and partners in development deals.
Got it.
Country.
Yeah.
Go
And
ahead.
I think
Bill.
I've got one more question for each. Matt, I'm going to go to you.
Oh,
The
boy.
question was, somebody wants to know, say they have a land and the building, but they're separate entities. Do they have to donate the land and the building? Can they donate the building but not the land but not the building, or does it have to be a package deal?
No, it doesn't. It all depends upon the structure. So if there's a building on a piece of land and they only want to contribute the building and hold on to the land, then there's got to be some lease structure. And the answer to the question is the building has a value. If the building could be sold in such a way where the land is not a part of the sale, and this is where we would do our due diligence with the real estate professionals in the area. If we could sell the property or sell the building as a building without land, and we can do that transaction, we'll look into that. It's very difficult to say, yeah, we can do it 100% of the time. We have each of these are uniquely done, but we won't turn anything down in at least doing our due diligence. But to answer your question, theoretically, yes.
Thank you. And then one more for Mike and Brian. When you are working with individuals, you had just touched on that anybody can invest in any of the deals. When you're working with groups today versus a year ago, versus 2 years ago, versus maybe what you see in the future, are you dealing with more large scale corporations? Are you dealing with more individuals that own land and want to build buildings to lease them out? What are you seeing?
Most of our clients, we're all over the board, actually. In terms of the last point there, we don't have a lot of people who try to play developer in our space. It's you really need to know what you're doing to go and own a piece of land and develop an institutional grade warehouse. That would be very, very unlikely in our world. More likely they'd end up, that land would go to market and they would fetch top dollar nowadays for that and recognize their money there. But we go from the private developer all the way through the international REITs. But most of the people we deal with, at least on the industrial side, do this day in and day out. They have multiple buildings, or we deal with a lot of corporations as well that are doing build to suits for that specific company for their actual operation. Do you have any difference on that?
Oh yeah, I mean that pretty much covers it. We do deal with a lot of end users who are in the same space, who have distribution requirements. And this is their second home. They're building these facilities for themselves. I think on broader strokes here, the markets move so fast. The land values are skyrocketing. You have to be very savvy. These guys are very sharp. The people in the space are sharp. The due diligence periods are shorter than they've ever been historically. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely an educated consumers market, and definitely some savvy players across the country are getting sharper every day, which is creating great opportunity because they're recognizing value that no one saw before, because you have to, because it's just not there.
And I will leave this with just saying, and your real estate can be a tremendous support to the land and people of Israel through the Jewish National Fund. If you have a piece of property, you're not quite sure what you want to do with it, you might want to save some taxes or just alleviate yourself of the headaches, give us a call. We might have something we can show you. Bill?
Sorry, I just want to thank everybody. Thank Michael and Brian for being here today and for sharing their insights. And like Matt said, if you have any questions, please reach out. We are here and we'll put our information in the chat so you can reach out if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you
Thank
all.
you
and
so
you'll be
much.
hearing-
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
We will do another series in several months, and hopefully you'll join us. We'll have some interesting topics. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.